Students, faculty, staff, and honored guests, please take your voice. The program will begin momentarily. I always wanted to be the voice of God. That's what they call them in these programs. Welcome, everyone. Good morning and welcome to our second annual Interfaith Symposium. Last year, when I did my inaugural lecture, I thought, well, why don't we make this an annual event? But then I realized I wouldn't be the speaker every year. So I'm so delighted to have all of you here. This topic of what we're addressing today was conceived of a year ago, actually, because we thought that this is a moment in which the work that we do at the Institute to bring people together and have conversations is needed now more than ever. I have the distinct pleasure of serving as the Al-Hibri Endowed Chair and the Executive Director of the Interfaith Institute at Augsburg. This is now my second year here in this role, and it has been an invigorating time. Oh, I didn't realize. In case you didn't have enough of me on stage in real life. So we wanted to start as we do at Augsburg. For those of you who are not aware, we have a very robust Native American student population. And we also are in a neighborhood that is also very key to that community as well. But even more so, this land is also part of that story and the story of Augsburg. Augsburg University recognizes the Dakota as sovereign nations and acknowledges that we are occupying their land. The Dakota are the original inhabitants of Minnesota Makahoche, and we condemn the injustices and genocide they have faced. We honor the Dakota and their continued lived experiences on this land, their wisdom about this place, and their recognition that we are all a part of the same creation. We ask our guests today to reflect on their relationship with this land that we stand on and continue to advocate for the autonomy and self-determination of indigenous sovereign nations. The purpose of our annual symposium is to bring together students, faculty, staff, and community members to explore what it looks like to use our perspectives, to use our engagement for this conversation. And one of the things that we think is really important is to be able to use this space for creation of good in the world. And right now, it's a moment where creation of good in the world, where passion and compassion need far more injection throughout our globe. Today, we have people attending both in person and virtually. I'd like to give a special welcome to those who are watching online. I'd also like to say a brief word about this year's theme, Building Trust in Divisive Times. It was conceived of a year ago, knowing that we were on the eve of elections in March, and that this is a time and a moment where we need to be far more engaged in conversations and constructive building across divides, because that is really the heart of any functioning democracy, is its capacity to problem solve for the dire issues of the moment. And that is something that happens when people come together and engage and think about how to address what affects so many of us. Just as an example, in our neighborhood, we have been working really diligently on the issues of the opioid crisis that have taken the lives of young people in our neighborhood, and we'll be hosting a conference in May for our community partners in the neighborhood, but particularly focused on youth. So I want to thank you again for being here, and I wanted to hope that you find this time inspiring. And something I want to say is to live in community is to live in conflict. That the passion that you express for whatever your views are, for whatever you are excited about, for whatever motivates you for justice, we welcome that. We want to hear those voices. Peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is built when it has a foundation of a viewpoint and a perspective that may differ from your own. So we're thankful for all the viewpoints and all the perspectives that are here today. And may we understand that it's not just, and we're not looking for common ground. What we're looking for is common humanity and dignity. Thank you so much. And we're welcoming Augsburg's president, Paul Pribbenau, to the stage.
One of the remarkable things about Augsburg over the past decade is it's become one of the most diverse private colleges in the country. In a world where faith and religion often are dividing people, we actually believe that faith and religious diversity are in fact constructive forces for good in the world. And that is something that I think sets us apart. It actually changes the whole nature of the conversation both on campus, but it also changes the model, the example that we provide to the wider world about how religion in fact can be a force for good.
Being a Muslim at a Lutheran campus allowed me to explore my religion in a way I've not been used to. Augsburg is very unique, and it allows people to find themselves within this mess, this crazy situation of a world we live in.
There's a question that I ask when I intervene in conflicts, and the question that I ask one party or one side about the other is, are you in each other's futures? I think the core of our work at the Interfaith Institute at Augsburg University is to build bridges. So I really think about what we're doing in this moment, whether it's on campus, whether it's in our community at the national, international level, as building a future in which all of us are in that picture.
I always think about this commitment to interfaith work in three categories. So on one hand, there's a deep commitment to helping people to understand other faith traditions. But second, there are relationships that have to be built. And then the third piece is always about attitude. You know, you can have all the knowledge in the world, you can actually have relationships, but ultimately you've got to change people's mind.
The Interfaith Institute is supporting faculty like myself on campus by helping develop workshops such as religious diversity and belonging in the classroom. The Interfaith Institute both models and teaches our students how to overcome that division and instead to think about our shared humanity.
The diversity that Augsburg offers was super important to me, mainly because I have this deep-seated want to know more. And I felt like in every community I'd been in before that, it was very much the same. Same values, same ideas about everything, and it's been like ingrained in me since I was born. Going to school here at Augsburg University, very diverse, and I immediately took so much interest in just how beautiful every different religion and culture was around me.
Being an interfaith scholar ultimately means that you're coming in from different viewpoints of the whole world, whether you're Muslim, Jewish, Christian, or atheist even. You kind of just all come together to have these very specific dialogues. Being on this campus in general has shaped me to be someone who listens a lot more than speaks, to understand people and where they're coming from.
And we're able to really model what it means to have a conversation while sometimes vehemently disagreeing on issues. And I think that's really the powerful component of what we do at Augsburg. We're coming together, not saying we're coming together because we all agree, but we're coming together because we believe that we occupy this planet, we share this neighborhood, we share this campus, and there has to be a space in which we can come together to address really dire issues of our time.
And so the work we're doing right here in the Cedar Riverside neighborhood, for example, on harm reduction around the opioid crisis is a perfect example. Students who come from a Christian background, students from a Jewish background, our Muslim neighbors come together around the fact that this is having an impact right here, right where we are. And what can we do together to respond to that?
After college, I want to go into human resources, and that's all about people. Through interfaith work, I feel like I can really use that to be a good host and a good guest within my own workspace.
Focusing on the workplace is really important because it is one of the venues in our society where you can't duck away from diversity.
And I think the work we're doing in Interfaith right now is a movement that is very much alive on college campuses, but now spreading to other communities and organizations.
The skills we're learning in partnership with Augsburg are important for all of our team members, with the goal of everyone belonging at Mortensen. Understanding religion is one of the things we need skills in. I think the Interfaith Institute is an asset due to their flexibility and knowledge in the space. They've been able to adapt their programming to the needs of us at Mortensen and been able to meet us where we are to continue our DEI journey.
What we're doing here is preparing students to go out into the world and bring those skills. So we really see our work as investing in the long term of peace building both on our campus and we hope for many generations to come.
Good morning. I'd like to add my welcome to all of you, to our faculty, staff, students, alumni, members of the Board of Regents, and especially to those allies and colleagues who are here to join us in this important interfaith work. As you saw in the video, interfaith dialogue, understanding, and collaboration are foundational to an Augsburg education. We believe that Augsburg students take these experiences and values with them into the world, and they apply them in their lives, whether as professionals, leaders, community members, neighbors, members of family, so many ways these play a role in their lives. We know that the world needs more Augies, and your presence today and your support throughout this work really makes that possible. I want to say a special word of thanks to our symposium host committee for their work on today's program. They're listed on the screen. I understand they're about to be listed on the screen. Important folks that have helped us to think through this theme and to understand how we could bring together this remarkable gathering here today. So thank you to all of you. We can applaud, yes. Also want to ask you to join me in thanking our generous sponsors that are also listed on the screen, and so many folks that have stepped up to provide really important financial support for this. Today I want to say a special word of thanks to the Al-Hibri family. You've heard already that Najiba is the Al-Hibri professor and executive director of our Interfaith Institute, made possible through the generosity of the Al-Hibri family, and Nancy and Kareem Al-Hibri are here today, and we are so grateful to them, so thank you. And now it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Eric Jolly, who is the president of the Minnesota St. Paul Foundation and a member of Augsburg's Board of Regents, who will introduce our keynote speaker. Eric?
Osiatachitsu. It's alagi, the Cherokee language. That's how we give greeting. And it's a question. Now, in English, when we meet people, we also have a question. It's, hi, how are ya? And if they say anything other than fine, how are you, we stop dead in our tracks. It's alagi. The question is, are you full of joy? And if we happen to meet a child or a friend who says no, then it's on our obligation to help them take a moment to reflect and find their joy. See, in finding your joy, you don't deny your trauma or your pain. You don't miss the despair. You don't dismiss the hurt or other feelings. But you do remember, recall, and rejoice in your source of hope and faith. Joy is that reason that we are here. And I wanted to greet you with that question today, because in seeing you here and joining on this topic in this discussion, I can tell you I am full of joy. Thank you for being a part of this experience. Augsburg University is the most diverse campus in the Midwest. A fact which came about with deep intentionality and which is sustained through a sense of hope and joy among our students, our faculty, our staff, and the community in which we reside. Today, Augsburg embraces students from around the world with different religious and worldviews, with different experiences, and a passion to find the bridge that will allow them to work together towards a better future. This is an opportunity today for us to explore that chance towards building partnerships, recognizing differences and not overcoming them, but living together with them among each other. And I could not be more thrilled as an Augsburg Regent than to be able to introduce for today our speaker, Manu Meel. He is passionate about empowering young people to have a voice and bridge divides, with a belief that democracy is founded upon conversation, listening, and understanding. I am reminded that most democracy on this continent came before the settlement of 1776, but was founded in Native American communities and nations who not only had a passion for democracy, but a practice of something called the talking stick. On the West Coast, we call it a talking staff. And it is a symbol that whoever is holding it will speak and be heard completely until they are done. Manu Meel reminds us that speaking and listening is the foundation for the democracy that we want for our future. He is the CEO of Bridge USA, and as so, he is leading the largest and fastest growing student involvement program to bridge differences. He's broadly recognized. He serves on the boards of Convergence, American Promise, and the Bridge Alliance. He's interned as an associate with Amplo for venture capital and in the State Department as a political analyst. His work has been cited by the New York Times, the Atlantic, the Washington Post, and many other outlets. And in 2022, Manu was recognized by Forbes magazine on the Forbes 30 Under 30 Emerging Leaders list. Manu helps us to think, to understand, to bridge our differences, and to find joy in each other's world. Manu, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Jolly. It's an absolute privilege to be here with you today. I have to say that for all the folks that I have met, thank you so much for being here. For the folks that I haven't met, just know that this is only the second symposium, so it's only up from here. I just have to say a couple of thanks to some of the folks that have brought us here. First, Dr. Arishali, your point about are we filled with joy? I mean, starting with the notion of joy, this idea that joy means that you have and hold in tension, conflict, and happiness, challenge, and progress. I think that's something that we'll hear a lot from today. So thank you for your work and all you do. I want to thank Dr. Pribanow for all the work that you've done at this university. I want to thank the amazing executive director of the Interfaith Institute, Najiba Saeed. Thank you for having me. Reverend Paul, who's on the host committee, broke the news to me. He said that, Manu, we asked 20 people, and you're the first one you said yes. So thank you for entertaining, and having me here. I appreciate it. And finally, I want to thank the members of the host community and the folks of Augsburg. Just a show of hands, I'm just curious, how many students are here today? I just want to get an understanding of. Okay, awesome, welcome, thank you. Believe it or not, I actually think that you're probably the most important constituency in this audience, because actually it's in your hands. And also it was a way for me to know who am I slightly older than, but then also, just trying to figure it all out. I'm trying to figure it all out. Just so you know, I'm totally a fish out of water in the amazing reception that the First Lady hosted today. Thank you for all you do. I was meeting folks, and you know that I'm new to this community when I'm introducing board members to each other. I introduced Dennis to Paula, and I said, how are you doing? And they said, don't worry, we know each other. So not that many divides to bridge here. I'm grateful to be here with you today. My journey to this moment is an unlikely one. If you asked me why this theme of building trust in divisive times is an important one, and you asked me that 6 years ago, I would probably shrugged and given you an apathetic glance. In fact, I started college as a pre-med major. I had zero interest in politics, democracy, any of this. My mom is still confused as to what's going on. And in fact, in some ways, I think that we've picked a slice of work, a question that I think is necessary. So I want to tell you a little bit about my journey, about what brings me here. And then I want to give you 3 quick lessons, things that I've learned doing this work. And then I think we've got time for questions and answers. So please, 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 especially if you found something that I said that you were like, I don't know, that didn't make sense. That's the entire point of this theme. So I would love to welcome your questions. I want to hear them. I want to see with them. And especially if you ask a question that I don't know the answer to, that means that we've learned something today. So I want to bring you to a day that changed the trajectory of my life. February 2nd, 2017. It was my freshman year at UC Berkeley. And I grew up on the East Coast. I went to high school in Lexington, Massachusetts, and then I finally went off to college on the West Coast. And on February 2nd, 2017, a day that changed the trajectory of my life, I witnessed something firsthand. I witnessed what it means to fail in the pursuit of building trust. I witnessed firsthand what happens when pluralism fails, when democracy falters, when the forces of division, of people that are trying to slice and dice our country, when they take over, what that looks like. So let me give you a little bit of an insight into that day. February 2nd, 2017. It's 5:30 p.m. I'm walking back from my math seminar on campus, and in the distance, I hear helicopters flying overhead. And I see shouting in the distance and violence in the distance. And now this is Berkeley, so we've had a great relationship with protest. This is par for the course. This is something we'd come used to. In fact, it was celebrated as a part of campus life. But that day was a little different because I walked past this cafe. The window was broken. And inside there was a TV, a 50-inch LCD screen. I can remember it like it was yesterday. In that TV it said, CNN, UC Berkeley students protest free speech. It was a little bigger than a normal protest. And then the crazy thing about that moment was the television crew that was actually filming that protest was standing right next to me. And that was the breaking of the fourth wall. That was when all my life I'd felt like I was spectating democracy. Suddenly felt like a participant. So I went off into the distance. I walked into the crowd, saw hundreds of state troopers there, thousands of students, folks from the outside community coming in. And again, I have no idea what's going on. I'm trying to figure out, what cells break and what mitosis looks like. So it's confusing to me. But I'm also somebody that comes from India. My family grew up there. I lived in India. I understand what it's like when societies are struggling with tension. And so the next day, we walked back onto campus, and we saw the level of devastation, carnage, pain. And what was really interesting about that moment was that most students, most of the people in the community, were honestly just trying to have a conversation. They're just trying to have a dialogue. So what was the protest about? The protest was because the speaker by the name of Milo Yiannopoulos came to campus that day. And it led to some of the largest protests in Berkeley's history. In fact, that protest in that day was more significant, and it was as significant as when Martin Luther King came to campus in 1960. It caused the university millions of dollars in damages, but more importantly, the campus community was hurting. So me and some random people got together in the middle of campus, Sproul Plaza. We said, this is not normal. This is not normal. Forget what you think about the speaker. Forget what we think about what's going on campus. Let's just create a space to hear each other, to see each other. Now, doing this work for 6 years, let me tell you how incredibly naive that proposition sounded. But in fact, I think in some ways, wisdom comes in being naive. And so we pursued and we persisted. And the next day we hosted a conversation. We called it Bridge Berkeley. The students on campus thought it was a civic architecture frat. I was telling some of the folks on the bus on the way here, we had 65 students show up to our first ever conversation. 40 of them left 10 minutes in because they said, I thought we were building real bridges. I said, no. This is about figurative bridges. So we upped our marketing, and the following week, and the reason I'm telling you this is because the following week, we actually hosted a discussion, a conversation where we brought in the students that invited Milo. We brought in the students that protested him. We brought in folks from the administration. And what was so interesting about this conversation was that it almost didn't start. So what we did was we said, all right, how are we going to get this conversation going? How are we going to get this dialogue going? So we went around and we started sharing each other's vulnerabilities. What makes us who we are? Do I have siblings? What's my faith? What do I believe in? What's the name of my mom? You know, just basic things that make us human, you know? And believe it or not, the next 75 minutes changed the way that I'd thought about human nature. Because what we saw through that conversation was the possibility and opportunity of what happens when you take people from very diverse and different backgrounds, put them in an environment, in a space where they feel safe, not to sacrifice their sense of identity, but to share space for others. That conversation led to people radically changing and transforming the way that they thought about trust in society. So why do I share that story? Because coming out of that event, we built this organization and it went to different college campuses, very organic, went to Notre Dame, went to Colorado Boulder, went to Arizona State, went to Minnesota State, Mankato, my colleague Andrew's here. It started building. And as we built this organization where you had college and high school students coming across from lines of differences, trying to understand each other, I'll tell you that there are 3 big misconceptions, I think, about the work that we learned through this journey. There's 3 big misconceptions. Because what we learned during that journey is we traveled the country, we met young people. We did this road trip from Austin to Boston, where we met highly liberal college students from Austin, Texas. We met conservative pastors in Georgia. We met black activists in Selma, Alabama. We went up north through South Carolina, North Carolina, Fayetteville, which is a military town, then ended up in Washington, D.C., and then finally concluded the trip in Boston, doing multiple drives, conversations, tours like that. Throughout the experience of building Bridge, one thing has become apparent and true. Almost every one of those people wants a family where their kids can do better than themselves. People want to live in a community where they feel heard. And most importantly, people want to feel that sense of joy. And that wasn't dictated by ideology. It was a fact of human nature. And so here I am, incredibly naive with some of my best friends, trying to figure out how we bridge the gap between perception of what is happening in the news and in our politics and reality. Because I'll tell you, when you're walking the street and you're trying to talk to people, I can count in my hands how many times I've met some of those folks that are on Twitter, that are active, and most times you meet people that are willing to create space. So what are the 3 lessons that we learned that show us how we jointly face the future with hope and determination? 3 lessons. 3 things I learned. And importantly, I want to pose these as curiosities, because I'm incredibly early in my journey. Incredibly early. In fact, I'll tell you right now that most of the time we failed. But in those failures, these 3 things are things that I want to share with you. The first is that when most people hear this notion of building trust and bridging divides, they think that this is a centrist political project. In fact, I'll name it very clearly. Building trust is often cast in opposition to justice. Najeeba mentioned this a little bit in her opening remarks. And yet, first story I want to share with you is the National Bridge USA Summit we held in February of last year, where we brought college students from across the country. 2 to 3 students from every one of these chapters. And I'm sure this is also the case with you here right now. We had college students from conservative places like Louisiana and Texas and Alabama. We had deeply hardened folks from California. We had students that represented the liberal suburbs of New York. We had students that were all not united in the what, but united in the how. I don't know most of the folks' politics here, but I can tell you that most of us agree not on a set of ideas, but a set of temperament, a mindset. The first thing that we learned doing this work is that there's a new divide in our politics in our country. And it's not necessarily between ideology. That new divide is between those that want to empathize and those that want to exclude. That divide is between people that want to listen and create space and those that want to shut people out. That divide is between those that believe that democracy dies in discussion and those that believe that democracy thrives when we see each other's common humanity. There's a new divide in our politics. And what we found in our work is that that divide spans identities, religions, faith, ethnicity. It speaks to the core of human nature. You know, last year the Surgeon General came out with a report that said that there's a national epidemic in the United States. Do you know what he said the national epidemic was? Loneliness. You know, I visited my villages, if you go back to in India, where there's economic impoverishment, where people feel struggle, where there's pain. And yet, you mentioned to them that the problem that we face is loneliness. What's going on in our country? And I think the first part of that is recognizing that we seek connection. We seek an understanding, a sense that what it means to have e pluribus unum, out of many one, the only way you realize that ideal is by building and having conversations across lines of difference, but recognizing that this work does not mean that you're compromising your beliefs. And here's the second observation that we found. And it comes from a story. I want to take you back to July, Gettysburg, 2023. We held a convention, partner organization called Braver Angels. We're working with them. And we hosted a debate. It was a controversial debate. The topic that the community members wanted to discuss was, is America the greatest country in the world? That was the topic. Don't worry, I laughed the same way you laughed. I said, way to bridge a divide. Let's jump right into it. So that conversation persisted and it continued. And in the middle of that conversation, this white woman stands up. And she says that, I believe that the United States is the greatest country in the world because my grandparents fought in World War II. My uncle fought in Vietnam. My son fought in the global war on terror. And we're all curious, where is this conversation going to go? She made a real argument. She believed in what she said. You could tell. She was tearful. She was emotional. A couple of speakers after that, an African-American gentleman stands up. He owns a barbershop in Philadelphia. He stands up and he says, I don't know if you're right, because while your grandparents were fighting in World War II, my grandparents couldn't drink out of the same water fountain. My hand started shaking. 4 years ago, I was a pre-med major. Should have gone back. What do we do? What do we do? A couple of speakers later, in the reflection period, where we try to get an understanding of, well, how did we feel in that conversation? What did we think? The white woman stands back up, and she says, look, I still believe the United States is the greatest country in the world because it gave you the right to say what you said to me, but I also want you to know that I apologize for the sins of my grandparents. The African-American gentleman stands up right after that reflection because he felt a sense of guilt from her. He felt like she thought she was evil. And he told her, I also believe in this place because I want you to have the right to believe what you believe, but importantly, I want you to know that it means the world to me that you said that in this space, in this environment. And he said that in a way without diminishing what she believed. He said that in a way in where he recognized her humanity, and she recognized his. Now, you could probably be sitting here and saying, well, we already know who the Republicans, we already know who the Democrat is, but let me tell you one thing. In that moment, none of that mattered. In that moment, there was one thing that mattered. What was that one thing? That's right. Being heard. You know why that mattered? Because you could go to the flatlands of India, you could go to the rolling hills of Georgia, You go to the vineyards, the very wealthy vineyards in Napa, California. You could go to the frozen tundra in Russia. The one thing that does not change with humans is our desire to be heard. But, now you're sitting here and you're saying, because I work with college students on a daily basis, young people, and if you ever want to know where you're going wrong, just have a conversation with a college student. Manu, you're talking about creating spaces to be heard. And this goes to lesson number 3. You're talking about spaces to be heard, but doesn't that create space for the oppression that I feel because of their ideas? Doesn't that create space for there to be an existence of a sense of combat, of exclusion? I didn't know the answer to that question. When we hosted that first ever discussion after the Milo Yiannopoulos event, we were told many times, don't have that conversation. It's not required. Here's a question I asked them. What happens if we don't? What happens if we don't? Because the conversation between that African-American gentleman and that white woman was a conversation that existed in a moment and a space, but it changed their outlook on what is possible. To me, at my young age, it was a realization of what this idea of America actually means. We talk about a melting pot, but it seems boiling to me. We talk about this idea of diversity, but how many people are actually comfortable with difference? We talk about including others, and yet we can't have the conversation? Something seems off. So what did we learn? What was lesson number 3? It was that creating space for the other person's idea gives people the sense of community and shared understanding to not only feel heard, but to actually open the door to introspection. We want folks to understand and listen to, believe, and recognize our humanity. Well, we got to extend the respect to recognize theirs. But then there's a very particular thorny question that then came up after that. Because we went to many different colleges and high schools. The question became, who should create that space? How should you create that space? I'll name it very directly, because oftentimes the folks like me that do this work are criticized for not addressing the elephants in the room. So let's take a couple of the elephants in the room. One of the critiques that came up was, well, is it really the responsibility of those that are oppressed to host that conversation? I say to you that it is not my job to tell those folks to host that conversation, but it is certainly my responsibility. It's somebody's responsibility. Because as that saying goes, democracy dies in discussion, doesn't it? No. But here's the second lesson and challenge that we saw. After the tragic events of October 7th, when you saw turmoil ripping through college campuses, and you saw students across the country hurting, feeling deep fear, feeling a sense of angst, feeling a sense of anxiety, a threat to their existence, what happened? We had 21 of our different college campuses host these conversations where students got together and they said, look, there's only one way out. And it's a painful way. But the question again is, what happens if we don't take that way? The history of our species, the history of our societies is riddled with what happens when discussion gives way to exclusion. What happens when spaces give way to the lack of our ability to see each other. You ask me, why does building trust in divisive times matter? The notion of democracy rests on this idea that we have to give each other a space and a voice to exist. But how can we give each other a space and voice to exist when there's no trust and understanding within how we matter and exist? Why would I ever give space? Why would I want somebody to have a voice in my democracy when I don't fundamentally trust what they believe? college students told us across the country, and faculty and administrators, that the precondition to a vibrant democratic society is a society that recognizes that trust is at the cornerstone, and there's only one way to build trust. So then the question becomes, well, how does what we're talking about lines of difference, bridging political differences, recognizing and seeing each other's commonalities, having interfaith conversations where religious pluralism and diversity foster a sense of understanding, how does that actually meet the moment? How does that meet the moment? We've got a 2024 election cycle coming up. There's real issues. I feel pain. I feel a concern that what I'm seeing and what I'm believing is not being heard out there. So why should we be doing this of all the things that we could be doing at this moment? We better have a damn good answer to that question. Because the people are curious about why we should be building trust when they feel like their livelihoods are on the ballot. Well, I've got a couple thoughts for you to wrap this up. I was talking to this older gentleman who was sleeping on the floor the night that Dr. King was practicing his March on Washington speech in his hotel room. He was his first white secretary. The movement. And there's something very peculiar he told me. And this is for our liberal brothers and sisters in the crowd, the audience. Bridge building, recognizing the humanity within each other, recognizing the trust, recognizing the fact that this notion of out of many one, it is the backbone of every successful social movement of the 20th century. From Mahatma Gandhi and the Salt Marches in 1945, to Dr. King in the 60s with civil rights, to Nelson Mandela in South Africa in the 90s. Understanding and loving agape love, this notion that you and I exist for a better common purpose, a cause to grow and build and succeed, that is what accelerated those movements. And to my conservative brothers and sisters, we say that this notion of bridge building, listening, pluralism, openness, respect, it is the cornerstone of human flourishing and respect. I think that sitting down with somebody and having a conversation and telling them, but I disagree with you, is the ultimate way to recognize and show respect to somebody, because it means that we're willing to actually see them, hear them. This idea that I'm willing to have a conversation and sit across the dinner table and give you the time and space to say what's on your mind, you give me the time and space to say what's on my mind. Well, that's what drove humanity forward. So I'll end with this. Because the aim of this event was how we jointly face the future with hope and determination. Hope and determination, given the necessity to build trust in an incredibly challenging time where people's livelihoods are at risk. I heard an interesting fact today, because as you heard, I'm a fish out of water in Augsburg. And the interesting fact was that Augsburg is the most ethnically diverse campus in the Midwest. I was having a conversation with a gentleman at the reception hosted by the First Lady, and he mentioned in 2006, if I remember correctly, he was one of 3 Muslims. And now, campus population is 13 to 15% Muslim. I want to zoom out for an even 18 years. 18 years, this campus has increased its diversity and is trying to understand how to navigate the challenges that are posed by people that are different than each other. Let's zoom it out for an even quicker second. 250th anniversary of the United States in 2026. I did some Googling for you for a quick second. I was like, what does 250 mean in the context of human civilization and states and societies? Augsburg's been dealing with incredible diversity for 18 years. United States, 250. The Roman Empire, 1,800 years. Chinese civilization, the dynasty lasts for 1,500 years. Athenian democracy lasts for 400 years. To me, the challenges that we face, the problems, the difficulties, when people ask me where is hope, I say hope is in perspective and time. We're in maybe chapter 2 or 3 of our democracy. Depends on how long the books are that you read. 250 years. College students oftentimes ask me, Manu, why is it so difficult for us to have these conversations? And the first thing I tell them is that in 2045, when the United States is going to be the largest multiracial democracy in the history of humanity, what we're trying to pull off, this experiment, it's never happened before. For thousands of years, humans have lived in tribes, mired in deep identitarian conflict. A sense and belief that if you look different than I must attack you. That is the operating mode of our species for thousands of years. Why do I say that? Because we're in year 250. We're in year 250. And this campus is in year 18. The challenge question of our time, when students ask me, why should we bridge differences at this moment when we can be doing and working on so many other things, is that this is fundamentally the most important question that I think humans have ever faced, and importantly, it's a question that we have not been able to answer effectively. If we're able to deliver a democracy where people that look very differently than each other, with different ideas, different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different identities, different backgrounds of faith, can actually not only thrive in spite of their differences, but because? Well, damn, that's never happened before. Year 250. The question that I've got for you is, how bad do we want it? Thank you.
So let's give Manu so much thanks. And I know we have some students also up at the top. So we wanted to ask you to start off, turn to your neighbor and share one thing that you learned or that you found insightful. So turn to your neighbor. We want to kind of model a democratic conversation. So turn to your neighbor and share one thing that you learned. So I do this one just. Yes. All right, everyone, thank you. So, all right. So okay, this is exactly, this is how if my students know, it's a very interactive environment for how we do Interfaith Scholars. work and in our class. And I wanted to recognize we have some of our interfaith scholars here, and I'm so thankful for the work that they've been doing this past year. One of them introduced me to the concept of humble listening, which is to listen with humility, and their final presentations in a moment where so many things seemed impossible, at least in the classroom, we were able to have the conversations. So we're going to take 2 questions, and I'm going to ask, we'll have 1 question and the second question, then Manu will respond and we'll close out. I hope that the conversations that you started today, you will continue. And so if I can recognize 2 people that want to ask questions, raise your hands. Anyone else? Any other questions? You guys up at the top, I can't see, but yes. Okay. Any questions from students? All right, so my students are looking at me and laughing. So wonderful, so we'll just, yes, no, students?
We got one.
Yeah. All right, so let's go ahead, Deanna. Oh, I can't.
Thanks so much for your presentation and for your work. I'm Deanna Thompson, and I work at St. Olaf College down in Northfield. And I'm wondering about this focus on trust, and I'd love to hear just a little bit more, like, trust in what are we thinking about? And I know our students are increasingly not trusting institutions, the political process, religious communities, and wondering if, like, you know, when you were talking about the who brings people together, I mean, maybe it's trust that there's going to be a conversation where everyone's heard. And I love Najiba's question about that, are we in each other's future? And wondering if kind of building relationships, is that kind of what we're talking about with building trust? But just, I think I see a lot of skepticism among our students about trusting, and just wondering what your response is. Thank you.
Should I respond to that, Najiba, or would you like me to wait? Okay. I think it's a great question, if I understand that correctly. And your name is Deanna, correct? Welcome. When we think about trust, I think there's a couple of axes upon which you think about actually understanding and seeing each other. I think skepticism is amazing. I think it's important to be skeptical. In fact, I think that skepticism leads to the opportunity for trust. You know, half of Bridge USA was built in college dorm rooms where all we did was critique what young people like me call the establishment. You know, like, it's important to have that skepticism. But I think the question becomes, what's the end point of that skepticism? What are we aiming for? And I think that the goal of our work, when you join a Bridge USA chapter on a campus, or when you're engaged in interfaith conversation at the Institute, I think objectively and fundamentally the goal is to restore trust between each other as humans, as individuals. I think right now what's happening is that the way in which our political beliefs express themselves dominate our own identity. It fills that void and fills that gap. And so then what happens is the animus that you and I face towards each other means that you and I are now in an existential conflict. And my belief and my proposition would just be that I think that that puts us on an unsustainable path as a democracy. And not only does that put us on an unsustainable path as a democracy, I think the question becomes, what is this democracy actually trying to achieve? And I think the history of what I see societies experience is a history in which conflict is actually the norm. Fighting is actually the norm. What we're trying to build is incredibly challenging because it has never happened before. And so it's about restoring trust in each other so that we see that this is actually possible. And the last thing I'll just say is that the question then becomes, well, why does it actually matter if it's possible or not? And I think the reason why it matters is because I think this place is trying to build a sense of shared belonging and sense of a belief that you and I together build something bigger. You know, there's this saying that often comes to democracies, which is that democracies should be thriving because of our difference. And the question that I have is that true here? And if not, what is the way to get there? And I can do one more quick one if there's another.
There's in the back. I don't think I need mine.
No, you're good, ma'am. Thank you. Oh.
This might not be quick, but you can answer it however you want to. You talked about the difference between, the divide really being between people who want to empathize and people who want to exclude. And so I know in this work, it's really important not to place value judgments, but it does seem like one's a path forward and one's kind of a wall. And so is part of the goal to work with folks who want to exclude to want to be more empathetic? Like how does that bridge work?
I think it's important to recognize that exclusion and this desire that we have as people to push people out is actually just as natural of a desire as welcoming people in. You know, if you went to my village in India, a lot of us would feel excluded. Not necessarily because the folks there have exclusion in their heart, but because the way that we as people have often worked is that we're anxious towards difference. And so I think the question becomes the role that allies can play in creating the space for challenging exclusion. Because I think that the way that exclusion manifests is it comes out of a place of deep loneliness and deep sense of alienation. It comes from a place of insecurity. And my belief in my work is all focused on how to give space where we can actually challenge that insecurity in a productive way so that we can build that bridge, not for some moment of just unification, but for a moment where our conflict can actually exist in proper tension so that you can experience that conflictual feeling of joy. That's at least what I think. And I'll just quickly just close with this because I know we're a couple minutes over, is just that I hope that something that you heard today is something that you might have disagreed with. That's my hope. Because I come humbly to you very, very early into my journey. And my hope is that something that you might have heard, you said, you know what, that didn't make sense. In fact, I think that that's actually the goal of this work. It's not to quell and create artificial harmony. But the only way that that harmony leads to progress is when we actually leave that conversation with a sense of trust or belief that you're at least ready to listen to me and I want to listen to you. So I hope that something I said didn't settle well, because that's the objective.
Thank you so much. We are so delighted. Please join me in giving Manu another hand. So another, yes. Oh, lovely. We have. So I think one of the profound lessons, not just from Manu's talk, but we invite passion. We invite passion for whatever you may have and whatever you believe in. And we also want to create spaces of compassion, where we increase the ability to walk with someone else's story, which is what compassion means. So may we increase our passion for whatever it is and wherever we see injustice, and may we increase our compassion to walk with one another on those journeys. Now, this is like the bathroom part of the speech, meaning where the bathrooms are, not that I'm going in that direction as a 5-year-old, as my kids would do at the table. For some reason, potty humor stays until they're about 11, just in case you're wondering. If you're staying for lunch, for people who have, you'll go to the Hagfors Center. It says pointing to the right as we conclude. There are signs pointing you where to go, and we have volunteers to assist you. I personally want to thank everyone for attending today's symposium, in person and online, and for your work to build trust in your communities. This is messy, dangerous, difficult, complex work. So thank you for showing up today, and I hope the table is set so that you feel welcome, and if not, let's build a new table together. Thank you.